In the fog of war, things disappear. Maps lie, radios go silent, and sometimes entire machines vanish without a trace. In early March 2022, as Russian forces pushed west across the Kherson region, a T-72B3 main battle tank rolled into a dense belt of forest near the Mykolaiv front. It never came back out. There was no explosion, no drone footage, no contact. One moment, Major Alexei Sidorov and his three-man crew were moving with the 205th Motor Rifle Brigade. The next, they were gone. The unit had been assigned to reposition during a tactical redeployment along the Inhulets River, a volatile sector marked by shifting lines, sabotaged bridges, and thick swamp terrain where GPS faltered and communications often failed. Initially, no one panicked. In wartime, temporary silence is routine. Signals break up, units go dark. Everyone assumed the crew would check in after clearing the forest. But hours turned into days. No radio calls, no sighting from satellite reconnaissance, no heat signature, just a phantom blip erased from every screen. When patrols retraced the tank's projected route, all they found was churned mud and broken tree limbs. No fuel spills, no wreckage, just absence. By April, command officially marked the crew as missing in action. The brigade was rotated out. Another unit moved in. War pressed forward, but rumors began to swirl. Some said the crew had deserted. Others whispered about friendly fire, or that the Ukrainians had captured the tank intact and buried it in the swamp. An anonymous dispatch in a telegram channel claimed the tank had been swallowed whole by a sinkhole. Still others insisted the story was classified, that it was one of those phantom losses buried in bureaucracy and silence. For 2 full years, the file remained open but untouched. No remains. No serial numbers. No proof the tank had ever left the forest at all. It became a ghost story among Russian tankers. "Don't take the east road through Mern," they'd say. That's where Berkut disappeared. His call sign was Berkut, the Golden Eagle, a name he carried with pride, not arrogance. Major Alexei Sidorov was a career officer, 43 years old, with over 2 decades in armored units. To his men, he was a commander who knew when to bark and when to shut up. His tank was always the first to cross the river and the last to pull back. Decorations lined his service jacket, but he rarely spoke about them. Born in Kursk and trained in Chelyabinsk, Sidorov rose through the ranks as a pragmatist, not a politician. He wasn't flashy, but he was precise. And in war, that counted for everything. In late February 2022, as Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Sidorov was reassigned to the 205th Motor Rifle Brigade and deployed south to the Kherson front. His mission: to support mobile assaults across contested river crossings near Mykolaiv. The terrain was swampy, broken, and infested with mines. Ukrainian drones patrolled day and night. But Berkut remained calm. "Stick to the tree lines, watch the tree lines, always the F-ing tree lines," he'd say on open comms. On March 4, 2022, at 13:17, his T-72 radioed in from grid sector K-34, confirming passage across a makeshift bridge laid over the Inhulets. Sidorov's voice was flat, calm, unremarkable. "Proceeding north," he said. That was the last anyone heard. At 13:39, a routine signal check bounced back no response. Calls were repeated every 5 minutes for the next hour. Nothing. Drone footage of the area was inconclusive. Visibility was poor. The swamp was already flooding from snowmelt. At first, command suspected jamming. Then they feared contact with Ukrainian ambush teams. But no engagement reports came in. By dusk, Sidorov's T-72 had vanished from the brigade's operational map. Attempts to triangulate their last position failed. The only clue was a partial data burst from the tank's thermal imaging system recorded at 1326, an anomaly in the forward sector. It showed nothing but a blur of heat and reads. The transmission ended mid-frame, not with static, not with noise, just cut, like someone had yanked the cord. The T-72B3 is not a relic. It's an updated Soviet workhorse, fast, brutal, and designed for shock engagements. With a 125mm smoothbore cannon, Contact 5 reactive armor, and thermal optics, it can deliver punishing blows while taking a few itself. Russia deployed hundreds of them to Ukraine in 2022, often in tight armored columns intended to smash through defensive lines and hold strategic choke points. But, like any machine, the T-72 is only as effective as the men inside it. And this one had three. Major Alexei Sidorov in command, a gunner known only by his surname Taranov, and a young conscript, Vitaly Marchenko, just 19, serving as the driver. Official records listed a fourth crew member, a loader, but his identity was never confirmed. Inside the tank, conditions were cramped, hot, and deafening. The crew relied on coordination, muscle memory, and blind trust. There were no second chances in a firefight. But this tank didn't go down in battle. It vanished on a routine redeployment. The questions have never stopped. Did they get ambushed? A Ukrainian drone strike could disable a tank in seconds, but no crater or heat signature was ever recorded. Could the tank have malfunctioned? Engine failures, particularly with the older V84 diesel, were common in swamp terrain, especially in March, when the thaw turned roads to soup. A power failure could strand a tank in under 10 minutes. But even then, where was the wreck? Some theories ventured further. Defection. Had the crew deliberately gone off-grid? Locals reported seeing Russian soldiers moving through marsh villages, weeks later disoriented, begging for civilian clothes. Desertions were rare but rising. Then there's the darker possibility: internal conflict. A mutiny. Tensions ran high in crews pressed into frontline duty without clear support. Maybe something broke down, not just the tank, but the men inside it. No theory fits cleanly. There were no mayday calls, no signs of pursuit, no thermal trail. It was as if the tank drove into the forest and simply dissolved. Southern Ukraine in the spring of 2022 wasn't a battlefield. It was chaos wrapped in smoke. What began as a sweeping maneuver by Russian forces to capture key access points along the Black Sea quickly unraveled into a grinding, shapeless fight. Supply convoys were ambushed and scattered, maps became meaningless. Front lines blurred, redrawn daily not by strategy, but by drones, artillery, and mud. For the Russian 205th Motor Rifle Brigade, Kherson was supposed to be a temporary station. Instead, it became a trap. Communications were unreliable. Fuel shortages were daily. Rations spoiled. And in the background, Ukrainian forces exploited every weakness with frightening precision. Bayraktar drones, HIMARS, strikes, and sabotage units that struck at night and vanished by morning. Tank units like Major Sidorov's were often sent ahead to probe weak points or secure river crossings. But ahead could mean isolation. A single wrong turn or delayed radio report meant no backup, no medevac, no extraction. Vehicles disappeared in terrain that offered no roads, just bogs, canals, and forests thick enough to swallow steel. In the early weeks, many Russian units moved without full intel. Maps were outdated. Bridge crossings marked safe were already rigged to blow. Villages assumed friendly turned hostile overnight. In this maelstrom, even well-disciplined crews could vanish. When Sidorov's tank went dark, nearby units were too busy holding their own lines to mount a search. Air assets were prioritized elsewhere. Command chalked it up to a likely hit and run. With no bodies and no fireball in the sky, there was no headline, no escalation, just another quiet absence in a war that was already moving on. Those who knew better didn't talk. The Southern Front in spring wasn't about victory, it was about endurance. Tanks rusted in fields they were supposed to defend. Artillery crews fired blind, relying on half-heard coordinates. Men went missing, and nobody noticed until years later when the ground finally gave up its secret. When Major Sidoroff and his crew failed to report in, the paperwork moved faster than the tanks. Within 72 hours, their absence was entered into the Central Operations Log as non-responsive, cause unknown. Within a week, they were listed as MIA. Just 3 more faceless names added to an ever-growing spreadsheet of missing personnel. Internally, a field report was filed, but the language was vague, intentionally non-committal. Probable loss due to terrain complications and communications failure. No autopsy, no wreckage, no funeral, just silence wrapped in bureaucracy. Within the brigade, the story was different. Soldiers whispered their own explanations between cigarette breaks and ration packs. Some said the tank hit a mine, flipped, and sank into one of the forest's bottomless marshes. Others claimed the crew had defected, turned their guns on their own, and escaped across the lines. One rumor, spreading fast among junior officers, was that Sidoroff had gone rogue, sick of the war, the lies, the bodies. A telegram message from an anonymous user even claimed the tank had been spotted driving alone at night near the Pervomayesk forest, its headlights off, no markings, no crew visible. It vanished before anyone could confirm. Moscow didn't like questions without answers. When a second request was filed in late April to reopen the investigation, it was quietly denied. The brigade's political officer told the men to focus on the living, and the file was marked inactive. But some couldn't let it go. One of Sidorov's former commanders reportedly tried to trace the tank's last radio ping using declassified drone data. He was reassigned within a month. Another officer who'd served with Taranov was caught asking questions on secure channels. His login credentials were revoked. By late 2022, the tank had become a kind of myth, a Cold War ghost story for a new generation. Officially, it didn't exist anymore. Unofficially, it became a warning. The war didn't just take lives, it erased them. Spring 2024. The snow had long melted, but the land around the Inhulets River was still soft, waterlogged, and unwelcoming. Ukrainian forces had pushed deep into the southern front, reclaiming territory inch by bloody inch. Drones patrolled the marshes near the old Mykolaiv-Kherson line daily, mostly mapping enemy positions or scanning for mines left behind. But on April 12th, at 9:44 a.m., a reconnaissance quadrotor operating out of a forward base near Kalinivsky picked up something strange. Beneath the canopy of a low-lying swamp, mostly hidden beneath reeds, algae, and years of muck, was the unmistakable contour of armor plating, angled, wide, and rusting. Analysts scrubbed the footage twice, then a third time. It was no shell crater, no bridge fragment. The thermal readings were dead cold. But the outline was unmistakable, a Soviet-made T-72. The drone hovered for a full minute, its downward-facing camera trying to get a clear angle through the foliage. On the screen back at base, one of the technicians muttered, "That's not wreckage, it's parked." The tank wasn't twisted or shredded, no impact craters surrounded it. It sat there, half submerged, nose first in a shallow pool, as if someone had driven it in and never came back. It had clearly been there a long time, tree roots twisted around the drive sprockets, the engine deck was blanketed in moss, and reeds had grown tall through the open turret hatch. The discovery sent ripples through both Ukrainian intelligence and international observers. Could it be one of the phantom tanks rumored to have disappeared in 2022? Was it booby-trapped, a decoy, or something else entirely? Within 48 hours, a small detachment from Ukraine's 123rd Territorial Defense Brigade was deployed to the coordinates. They moved slowly, watching for tripwires, mines, or surveillance drones. But as they got closer, the sense of danger gave way to something stranger. The tank didn't look destroyed. It looked abandoned, like whoever had been driving it had simply stopped, climbed out, and walked into the swamp. The recovery team arrived at dawn, boots sinking into the saturated earth as the mist clung low over the reeds. Ukrainian engineers from the 703rd Engineering Battalion moved cautiously, clearing brush and probing for anti-handling devices. It had become standard practice. Many abandoned vehicles were rigged to detonate upon inspection. But this one felt different. The silence around it was too complete. No bird song, no rustle of frogs in the undergrowth, just a rusted carcass half swallowed by mud and time. The tank had wedged itself into the swamp like a dropped coin in wet clay. Its front end was submerged nearly to the turret, while the rear was partially exposed, treads buried, sprockets fused in place. Moss coated the upper glacis like velvet. Vines and thin tree limbs clung to the barrel, which pointed slightly upward as if still on overwatch. There were no blast marks, no armor spalling, no evidence of a hit. The T-72 looked whole, inert, like it had been driven in on purpose and left behind. Recovery crews rigged steel cables around the main frame and turret ring, then brought in a tracked utility vehicle to haul the 40-ton tank free. It groaned as it moved, rusted joints snapping, swamp water gurgling out of the hull in great choking breaths. The journalists on site, mostly embedded with regional press, circled like crows, snapping photos and whispering theories. One reporter from Kyiv said it reminded her of the Kursk wreck, how a machine of war could become a mausoleum. As the tank was dragged onto solid ground, more oddities surfaced. The side skirts were intact. The ERA blocks hadn't been touched. No attempt had been made to strip or scavenge the vehicle. Even the rubber track pads were still partially usable. Whoever had abandoned this tank hadn't done it under fire. They had done it deliberately. But why? No signs of a struggle, no trail leading away. Just a sealed turret, a dead machine, and the oppressive weight of 2 years of silence. The hatch opened with a scream. Engineers had to force it, 2 men wrenching a rusted lever until it gave way with a dull metallic crack. The interior reeked of mildew, wet oil, and decay. A small inspection team was the first to descend, flashlights piercing the stale air. What they found inside raised more questions than answers. The commander's seat was empty, turret controls untouched. The gunner's position was rusted over, optics clouded with moisture. Mud had seeped in through the ventilation slats, pooling in corners where ration wrappers floated like dead leaves. The driver's compartment was tight, claustrophobic, his seatbelt still clipped in, but no one in it. No signs of trauma, no blood, no bullet holes, just absence. But it wasn't empty. In the loader's corner, tucked behind an ammo storage rack, they found a sealed metal box. It had once held spare shell components, but someone had repurposed it. Inside, a folded fleece jacket, 2 black and white family photos wrapped in plastic, a spoon, and a water-stained notebook, a journal. Its pages stuck together, but the ink on the outer leaves remained legible. Cyrillic handwriting, tight and deliberate. The first entry was dated March 1st, 2022. The last, March 6th. The team didn't open it further, not yet. Forensics needed to scan it first. On the floor lay 2 unopened ration packs, stamped with the logo of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Nearby, a ceramic Orthodox icon had been taped to the inside of the turret wall, worn, cracked down the middle. A few coins had been placed beside it, deliberately, respectfully. The tank hadn't been looted. It had been left behind with care, almost like it had been buried. But there were no signs the crew had tried to survive inside. No empty water canisters, no distress messages, no improvised repairs. It was as if the moment the tank entered the swamp, time inside it froze. One soldier, a junior lieutenant, whispered to his partner as they climbed out, It feels like they never left, but also like they were never here at all. Forensic technicians dried the notebook page by page, peeling apart the waterlogged sheets with tools better suited for archaeology than warfare. Much of the ink had bled into Rorschach-like stains, but fragments remained intact enough to reconstruct a voice that had been silent for 2 years. Major Sidorov didn't write like an officer preparing an official log. His entries were personal, hurried, and increasingly erratic. The first legible passage was calm, almost routine. March 2, crossing delayed, roads washed out. Taranov insists the western route is safer. Map does not match terrain. Marshland expanding. Another entry, dated just 1 day later, carried a sharper edge. Engine struggling, mud up to the skirts, driver panicking. Something wrong with the compass needle spinning. Investigators debated whether water damage distorted the lines, but the handwriting grew jagged, slanted, as if written with a shaking hand. The fourth salvageable note hinted at a shift in the crew's behavior. Marchenko refuses to sleep. Says he hears someone outside the hull at night. Footsteps in water. No one there when I check. Then another, broken by blotches of ink. Saw lights between trees, like lanterns, but we are alone. One of the final pages was the most disturbing. The words were carved into the paper with the pen tip long after the ink ran dry. We are being followed, not by Ukrainians. A water stain obscured the next line. Only parts of it survived. Voices, under the mud, telling us to leave the tank. The last decipherable entry was just 5 words scratched with trembling pressure. Taranov fought me last night. After that, nothing. No date. No signature, no conclusion, just a blank sheet warped by swamp water. But one detail unsettled investigators more than anything else. Tucked into the back flap was a torn strip of cloth, Russian military uniform fabric stained with something dark. Whether mud, oil, or blood, no one could confirm. News of the recovered tank spread quickly across military analysis channels. Experts dissected every angle, every photo, every frame of drone footage. Theories erupted like shrapnel. The simplest explanation, mechanical failure, was the first dismissed. A tank doesn't sink itself neatly, with no escape attempt, no emergency markings, no signs of repair. A tactical retreat gone wrong? Possible. The Southern Front in early 2022 was a moving labyrinth of crossed orders and vanishing supply lines. Dozens of vehicles were abandoned in the first chaotic weeks. But even then, crews usually stayed together, leaving footprints, equipment, something. Here, there was no trail, no bodies, no signs that men had moved through the swamp after exiting the tank. Desertion? Some analysts considered it. Sidorov was experienced enough to know the terrain was unforgiving, but fear and exhaustion could drive anyone over the edge. Still, deserting into a swamp made no sense. The crew would have been dead in hours. Others dug deeper into the journal, pointing to paranoia, disorientation, possible chemical exposure, or carbon monoxide buildup inside the sealed hull. A few whispered about friendly fire cover-ups. Maybe the tank had witnessed something it shouldn't have, but outside the military circles, in the surrounding villages, people had their own interpretations. Locals near Mern claimed they saw strange flickering lights in the forests during the spring of 2022, dim orbs weaving through the fog, drifting above the marsh. Hunters recalled hearing the low rumble of an engine long after Russian forces retreated, an engine turning over, choking, then going quiet. One elderly man insisted he saw a tank silhouette at dusk, half submerged, with someone standing on the turret. When he returned the next morning, there was nothing but reeds. These stories were dismissed as fear, imagination, or wartime trauma. But after the journal was released, those old sightings resurfaced, louder than ever. Analysts called it folklore. Villagers called it truth. And between them sat the abandoned T-72, pulled from the swamp, like a fossil, silent, intact, and offering no answers. The breakthrough didn't come from the tank, but from the forest. 3 weeks after the T-72 was recovered, a Ukrainian demining patrol operating near a tree line 6 kilometers east of the swamp stumbled upon something half buried beneath a thicket of roots. It wasn't shrapnel or munitions. It was bone. Shallowly interred, barely hidden dirt heaped by hand, not shovel. Within hours, the site was cordoned off. Forensic teams unearthed partial remains. 3 bodies, or what was left of them. The soil had preserved little, just fragments of uniform, a few teeth, and a badly rusted sidearm. One skull bore a clean, round hole through the right temple. Execution or firefight? Suicide or mutiny? No one could say. DNA testing began immediately, cross-referenced with Russian military databases. Days later, a hit. Vitaly Marchenko, the youngest crew member, the driver, 19 years old when the war began. His dog tag had been bent into a crude hook strung on wire around a shattered vertebra. The other 2 sets of remains remained unidentified. One had a larger build, possibly Taranov, the gunner. The third was almost skeletal, the bones scattered, chewed by animals. No ID, no insignia, just bone and silence. The presence of 3 bodies so far from the tank suggested something chilling. They had left the vehicle. Whether by force, panic, or choice, they had made it out and then died alone in the forest. Or worse, at each other's hands. The bullet hole was clean, no chipping, no hesitation, a deliberate shot. Ukrainian investigators found no shell casings, no sign of a firefight, just shallow graves and the eerie sense that whoever buried them didn't expect them to be found. Some experts suggested the crew turned on one another, driven to madness by isolation, starvation, or fear. Others pointed to the journal, the voices, the paranoia, the mention of someone or something outside the tank. If the crew had fled into the forest to escape it, they hadn't made it far. In war, not everything dies with an explosion. Some things rot slowly, vanish quietly, or get swallowed whole by the land. The T-72B3 now sits behind cordon tape at a secure Ukrainian military depot, rusting in the open air under a watchful guard. A relic of a battle no one remembers, connected to a crew whose final hours no one can explain. Major Alexei Sidorov's fate remains unknown. His name appears on Russian memorial rosters, etched in granite alongside thousands of others lost in the invasion. But his body was never found. His last words scratched into a soaked notebook suggest fear, confusion, and something more, something unspoken. Theories still swirl: mechanical failure, crew mutiny, friendly fire, chemical exposure, psychological collapse. Each explanation seems plausible. None fully fits. For all the advances in surveillance, drones, and satellite imaging, the war in southern Ukraine still left its blind spots, places where machines break, maps lie, and men disappear. The swamp that held the tank for 2 years has since been drained, searched, cataloged. Nothing else was found. No radio, no boots, no footprints. Just a crater of dead reeds and wet earth, like the ground itself had swallowed a secret. To some, it's just another MIA case, tragic but ordinary. To others, especially those who served in that sector, it's something else, a wound that doesn't close. They speak of the place with a quiet reverence. Not out of superstition, but because something about it resists answers. Maybe the crew got lost. Maybe they turned on each other. Or maybe they saw something in that forest they weren't meant to. And when they tried to leave, they didn't. The tank has been preserved as evidence. The journal is archived. The investigation remains technically open, but unofficially, it's over. What happened in that swamp may never be known. But when the wind moves through those trees, when the reeds sway just so, some say you can still hear the faint rumble of a tank engine turning over once, then going silent forever. this story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.